The contractions started at 4:17 in the morning, and I know the exact time because I was already awake. I'd been awake since 2, sitting on the floor beside the bedroom window with a kitchen knife across my lap, watching the street below for movement. 3 days into whatever this was, and sleep had become something I remembered rather than something I did. Our apartment was on the 6th floor of a building in downtown Portland, and from the window I could see the intersection of Burnside and 10th, where a delivery truck had jackknifed on the first night and still sat there. Its cargo of bottled water spilled across the asphalt like a shattered spine. Nobody had come to move it. Nobody was coming to move anything. "Marcus," my wife's voice from the bed behind me. Not loud, not panicked. That particular tone she uses when she's already processed something terrible and is presenting it to me finished. The way she hands me her tax documents every April. "Marcus, my water just broke." I turned from the window. Elena was sitting up in bed, both hands on her belly, her dark hair stuck to the side of her face. The sheets beneath her were dark with fluid. She was 37 weeks. The due date on every printout taped to our refrigerator said May 9th. It was April 22nd, 3 weeks early, and the world outside was eating itself alive. "Okay," I said, because that was the only word my mouth could find. "Okay." Don't say okay twice. That means you're panicking. I'm not panicking. You're holding a steak knife like a rosary. I looked down. She was right. I set the knife on the windowsill and crossed to her. Her skin was cool and damp. I pressed my forehead to hers, and for 3 seconds, the world shrank to the size of that touch. Then a sound came from the street. Something between a bark and a gargle, and the world expanded again, violently. "We need to get to the hospital," I said. Elena looked at me with the expression she reserves for moments when I've said something so far removed from reality that correcting it feels like cruelty. "Marcus, there is no hospital." She was right about that, too. Providence Portland Medical Center had been overrun on day 1. We'd watched the footage on Elena's phone before the cell networks collapsed. The emergency department entrance clogged with stretchers, then the screaming, then the feed, cutting to black. OHSU up on the hill had gone dark 12 hours later. Legacy Emmanuel, someone on the neighborhood text chain said, had been set on fire by its own staff to prevent the basement morgue from emptying out. I don't know if that was true. It sounded true. And in this new world, that was the same thing. "Then we find someone who can help," I said. "Who? Who is left? Who can help with this?" I had no answer. I'm a graphic designer. I make logos for craft breweries and brand guides for tech startups. I have never delivered a baby. I have never watched a baby be delivered. We'd signed up for a birthing class at the community center that was supposed to start next week, and the sum total of my preparation was a single YouTube video I'd watched 3 weeks ago on my lunch break, which I closed halfway through because the sounds made me lightheaded. That's who I am. That's who was standing in that room, being asked to solve the unsolvable. Elena breathed through a contraction. I watched her face tighten, hold, then release. She'd been having Braxton Hicks for 2 weeks, and I'd learned to read the geography of her pain. The way her jaw set, the way her nostrils flared slightly, the way her hands went flat against the sides of her belly, as if she could hold everything in place through force of will. This was different. This contraction had teeth. "How far apart?" I asked. That was the second one, maybe 12 minutes from the first. 12 minutes. I didn't know what that meant in medical terms, but I understood it the way you understand a countdown on a device you can't disarm. Something was beginning, and it did not care about the chaos outside, and it would not wait. I moved through the apartment with a kind of focus that comes only from suppressing every emotion at once. Kitchen first. I filled every pot we owned with tap water. The pressure had been dropping since yesterday, and what came out now was thin and rust-colored. But it came. I set the largest pot on the stove and turned the burner to high. The gas still worked. Small mercy. I didn't know why I was boiling water. It's just what people do in movies when a baby is coming, and movies were the only training manual I had. The pantry inventory was grim. 4 cans of black beans, 2 cans of coconut milk, a bag of brown rice, a jar of peanut butter with maybe 3 servings left, 6 bottles of water we'd filled from the tap on day 1 when we still had pressure and clarity, Elena's prenatal vitamins, almost full because she kept forgetting to take them, and I kept forgetting to remind her. And now that small failure felt like a betrayal of everything I was supposed to be. "I need towels," Elena called from the bedroom. "Clean ones." I pulled every towel from the bathroom closet. 5 bath towels, 3 hand towels, a stack of washcloths. I carried them to the bedroom and set them on the dresser. Elena had changed out of her wet clothes and was wearing my Portland Trail Blazers t-shirt, the one that hung past her knees. She was standing beside the bed, one hand on the headboard, swaying slightly. "I can't do this lying down," she said. "I read that lying down is the worst position. I need to move. Whatever you need. What I need is an epidural and a sterile delivery room, and a doctor who's done this 10,000 times. What I have is you and a steak knife." I moved the knife. "Marcus." "I know." She looked at me. In her eyes, I saw something I'd only seen once before. The day her mother called to say her father's biopsy results had come back wrong. Not fear exactly, but the recognition that fear was now a permanent resident rather than a visitor. She was recalculating everything, and the math wasn't working. "We're going to figure this out," I said. "Stop. Don't give me a pep talk. Give me a plan." A plan. I went to the living room and stood at the sliding glass door that opened onto our narrow balcony. Below, Burnside Street stretched east and west in the gray pre-dawn. A car was burning 2 blocks away, its flames the only light besides the emergency LED strips that lined the stairwells of the parking structure across the street. I could see 3 figures moving near the jackknifed truck. They moved the way they all moved now, not running, not walking, but something between. A purposeful lurch that covered ground faster than you expected. I watched one of them stop beside the truck's cab, tilt its head, and then slam its forehead into the driver's side window. Not to break it. There was no calculation in the movement, just repetition, like a moth against a bulb. Slam, pause, slam. I pulled the curtain shut. The plan assembled itself from fragments. Elena's OBGYN was Dr. Carla Espinosa, whose office was in the medical pavilion on Northwest 23rd, about 1.5 miles from our apartment. The pavilion itself was just a converted row of Victorian houses. Small, low profile, easy to miss. It wasn't a hospital. It wouldn't have drawn crowds. There was a chance, however thin, that it was still intact. And if Espinosa wasn't there, the office would still have supplies. Gloves, gauze, maybe instruments I couldn't name but might recognize. 1.5 miles. I could walk it in 25 minutes on a normal day. This was not a normal day. "Elena, Dr. Espinosa's office. Do you think you can walk that far?" She was leaning against the bedroom door frame now, breathing in a pattern she'd learned from an app on her phone. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 6. The app was called Calm Birth, and its icon was a cartoon lotus flower. and everything about it belonged to a world that had ended 3 days ago. "I can walk," she said. "But we're going through buildings, not streets." That was the moment I understood that my wife, despite being in active early labor, was already tactically ahead of me. While I was boiling symbolic water, she was planning a route. I loved her for it. I also hated that she had to be this person right now, when her body was demanding she be nothing but a body. "Through buildings," I repeated. "That's smart." "I know it is. Now find me shoes I can actually wear, because my feet are too swollen for anything I own." We left the apartment at 5:40 a.m. Elena wore my running shoes with the laces loosened to their maximum. I wore the leather work boots I'd bought for a hiking trip we never took. And I carried a backpack with the towels, the water bottles, the peanut butter, and a flashlight. In my right hand, I held a claw hammer from the toolbox under the kitchen sink. It was the most dangerous object I owned. And holding it made me feel like a child carrying a stick into a forest and calling it a sword. The hallway outside our door was dark. The building's power had failed on day 2, and the emergency lighting had lasted about 9 hours after that. I clicked the flashlight on. The beam revealed carpet, walls, a fire extinguisher in its glass case, and at the far end of the corridor, near the elevator bank, a stain on the floor that I chose not to examine. We turned left toward the stairwell. Elena gripped my arm. Her breathing was steady but deliberate. Each exhale a controlled release. We descended 6 flights in silence, our footsteps echoing in the concrete shaft. At the 3rd floor landing, something hit the stairwell door from the other side. A single heavy thud. We froze. Another thud. Then nothing. We waited 30 seconds, then continued down. The building's rear exit opened into an alley that ran parallel to Burnside and connected to a service corridor behind a row of restaurants. I'd taken the trash out through this alley 100 times. I'd never noticed how many shadows it contained. The pre-dawn sky gave just enough gray light to see shapes, and all the shapes looked wrong. We moved quickly. Elena's hand found mine, and I felt the dampness of her palm, the way her fingers tightened every time her body clenched with a new wave. The contractions were still about 10 minutes apart. We had time. I kept telling myself that. We had time. The service corridor behind the restaurant stank of spoiled food. 3 days of power outages had turned every walk-in cooler into a decomposition chamber. I breathed through my mouth and pulled Elena past the dumpsters and loading docks until we reached the back entrance of the Ace Hotel, which I knew connected through to Stark Street on the other side of the block. The hotel's back door was propped open with a rubber doorstop. Inside, the hallway was lit by a single battery-powered lantern someone had left on the floor, casting a circle of yellow light that made the surrounding darkness feel solid. We entered. The lobby was destroyed, not by the infected, but by people. The front windows were shattered. The furniture had been dragged into a barricade that now lay toppled and scattered. The reception desk was overturned. Papers everywhere. Key cards crunched underfoot. A suitcase sat open in the middle of the floor, its contents flung outward like an explosion of someone's former life. A silk blouse, a phone charger, a paperback novel played open with its spine cracked. "Don't stop," Elena whispered. We crossed the lobby in 12 steps. I counted them. On step 9, I saw the first one. It was sitting in one of the lobby chairs that hadn't been moved. A man, or what had been a man, in a hotel bathrobe. His head was tilted back as if he were studying the ceiling. His mouth was open. His eyes were open. He wasn't breathing, but something in his chest was moving. A faint, rhythmic pulse beneath the terry cloth, like a second heartbeat learning its tempo. He didn't turn toward us. He didn't seem to register that we existed. But his fingers, resting on the armrests, were tapping. Index finger, middle finger, ring finger, pinky. Repeating. A pattern that looked almost like thought. I pulled Elena past him. She didn't look. She was somewhere inside herself, navigating her own interior landscape of pressure and pain. And maybe that was a kind of protection, her body demanding so much attention that the horror couldn't get a full audience. We exited through the hotel's Stark Street entrance and turned north. 6 blocks to Northwest 23rd. 6 blocks through a city that had been one of the most walkable in America and was now a maze of abandoned vehicles, shattered glass, and silhouettes that might be human and might be the thing that came after. Elena stopped. She braced both hands on the hood of a parked Subaru and leaned forward, her body curling around the contraction. I stood beside her, with the hammer raised, scanning the street in both directions. And I understood with total clarity that I was the most useless guardian imaginable. A graphic designer with a claw hammer, standing watch over the most important person in his world. And the only thing between her and everything else was me. The contraction passed. Elena straightened up. "Keep going," she said. The medical pavilion on Northwest 23rd Street was a row of 3 converted Victorian houses joined by interior corridors, painted sage green with white trim. On a normal day, it looked like a place that sold artisanal soap. Today, its front door was closed. Its windows were intact. No blood on the steps, no barricade, no bodies. It looked untouched, which in this new world was its own kind of suspicious. I tried the front door, locked. I knocked, softly at first, then harder. Nothing. I cupped my hands against the sidelight glass and peered in. The waiting room looked normal. Magazines fanned on a table, a reception desk with a computer monitor still on, its screensaver cycling through photos of babies. I nearly laughed at that. The world's cruelest slideshow. "Side entrance," Elena said. She'd been to this building 40 times in the last 8 months. She knew it better than I did. We circled to the south side, where a wooden gate opened into a small patio that the staff used for smoke breaks. The patio door was glass, and it was unlocked. We entered into a narrow hallway that smelled of hand sanitizer and carpet cleaner. Examination rooms lined both sides, their doors standing open. I checked each one. Empty. Clean papers stretched across examination tables. Blood pressure cuffs coiled on their mounts. Anatomical charts of the female reproductive system mounted on walls, colorful and clinical, depicting the very process that was happening inside my wife right now, with far more order than reality would allow. "Carla's office is upstairs," Elena said. We climbed. The second floor held 2 more examination rooms and a private office at the end of the hall. The nameplate read, "Dr. Carla Espinoza, OB/GYN. The door was closed. I knocked. "Dr. Espinoza, it's Elena Reeves and Marcus. We need help." Silence. I tried the handle. The door swung open. The office was empty. The desk was neat. A laptop closed, a framed photo of 2 teenage boys in soccer uniforms, a coffee mug that read, "World's okayest doctor." There was no sign of emergency, no sign of flight. It looked like she'd left for the day expecting to come back. Elena lowered herself into the office chair and closed her eyes. I could see the exhaustion layered over the pain, both competing for control of her face. The walk had taken 40 minutes. It should have taken 15. "She's not here," Elena said. Not a question, a closing statement. "The supplies might still be." "Marcus, she's not here." I knelt beside the chair and took her hands. They were trembling, not from cold. "I'm going to check every room in this building. There might be someone. There might be enough equipment that we can... A sound from downstairs cut me off. Not a thud, not a shuffle. A voice. Muffled, human, and speaking in what sounded like Spanish. I left Elena in the office and moved down the hallway toward the stairs. The voice was coming from the ground floor, from a supply room near the back of the building. I gripped the hammer. The door to the supply room was closed, and from behind it came the voice again. Clearer now, a woman speaking rapid, quiet Spanish into what sounded like a walkie-talkie. I knocked with my knuckle. The voice stopped. "Hello? I'm not infected. My name is Marcus. My wife is upstairs. She's in labor." A pause long enough to age me a full year. The door opened 3 inches, restrained by a security chain that someone had installed from the inside. Through the gap I saw half a face. Brown skin, dark eyes behind wire frame glasses, and the kind of expression that combines terror with professional assessment. She looked at me, at my face, at my hands, at the hammer. "Put that down," she said. I set the hammer on the floor. How far apart are her contractions? Maybe 8 minutes now. Her water broke around 4. The door closed. I heard the chain slide. Then the door opened fully, and standing before me in surgical scrubs and sneakers, her hair pulled back under a bandana, was a woman I'd never seen before. She was not Dr. Espinosa. She was younger, perhaps early 30s, and she held a walkie-talkie in one hand and a scalpel in the other. "My name is Rosa Delgado. I'm a certified nurse midwife. I was at the women's clinic on Glisson until yesterday." She looked past me, up the stairs. "Take me to her." Rosa moved through the examination rooms like someone reviewing a toolkit. She opened cabinets, checked drawers, pulled items, and set them on the counter with decisive placement. Sterile gloves, gauze pads, a bulb syringe, hemostats, a package of sterile cord clamps, betadine solution, 2 bottles of saline, absorbent pads, a manual blood pressure cuff. "This office was well stocked," she said, more to herself than to me. "Small practice, probably handled low-risk deliveries here occasionally. That's fortunate." She carried everything upstairs in a plastic basin and set it on the examination table in the room nearest to Espinosa's office. She washed her hands in the small sink, scrubbing with the intensity of someone performing a ritual. And then she turned to Elena. "Elena, I'm Rosa. I'm a midwife. I've delivered over 200 babies. I'm going to examine you now. Is that okay?" Elena nodded. The relief on her face was so vast, I had to look away from it. Because looking at it meant seeing how frightened she'd been before. And I couldn't afford to absorb that and remain standing. Rosa's examination was brisk and gentle. She palpated Elena's abdomen, checked the baby's position by feel, then performed a cervical check. About 4 centimeters. Baby's head down, which is where we want it. Your labor is progressing normally. You've got time. How much time? Hours, probably. First baby? First baby. Then definitely hours. Your body's going to do the hard part. My job is to make sure it does it safely. Rosa glanced at me. Your job is to be present, stay calm, and do what I tell you. I can do that. You say that now. It's going to get loud and bloody, and you're going to want to fix it. You can't fix it. This is not a thing that's broken. This is a thing that's happening. Understand the difference. I understood nothing, but I nodded. Rosa set up the examination room with the efficiency of someone building a field station. She spread clean sheets on the table, arranged her instruments on a sterile drape, and positioned the battery-powered examination lamp she'd found in a closet so it illuminated the space without creating glare. She showed me how to take Elena's blood pressure and made me practice twice. 115/70, I read. Good. Write it down. Check again every 30 minutes. If the top number goes above 140 or the bottom above 90, tell me immediately. What does that mean? It means tell me immediately. Don't ask what it means while it's happening. Just tell me. Eliana laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh in 3 days, and the sound of it was so incongruent with our circumstances that it felt like finding a flower growing through a crack in a bombed-out road. Rosa smiled slightly. I like her, Elena said to me. She's mean to you. I'm efficient, Rosa corrected. There's a difference. She paused, then added, more softly, You're doing well, Elena, both of you. I excused myself to check the building's perimeter. The ground floor windows were all intact, the doors locked. The patio door we'd entered through had a deadbolt I engaged. The front door had 2 locks and a mail slot I stuffed with a rolled towel. I pulled the blinds on every window. From outside, the building would look as empty as we'd found it. Through the front window, I could see Northwest 23rd Street. The coffee shops and boutiques that lined the street stood dark and silent. A bicycle lay on its side in front of a frozen yogurt place. 2 blocks north, a group of 5 infected stood in a loose cluster near the entrance of a grocery store, motionless, their heads tilted at varying angles, like dogs listening to a distant frequency. They weren't hunting. They weren't feeding. They were waiting, though I couldn't say for what. I pulled the blind shut and went back upstairs. Elena was walking slow laps around the examination room. One hand on the wall, breathing through a contraction that made her stop and grip the doorframe until her knuckles blanched. Rosa stood nearby, watching with the calm attention of someone reading a familiar text. 8 minutes apart, Rosa said to me. Progressing. She handed me a bottle of water. Make her drink. She needs to stay hydrated. She doesn't like being told what to do. Neither does the baby. And the baby's going to win. The hours moved strangely. Labor, I learned, is not a continuous event, but a series of waves with valleys between them. And in the valleys, life almost felt normal. Elena talked. She told Rosa about our apartment, about the nursery we'd half finished, the crib still in its box, the mobile of paper cranes her sister had made that we'd hung from the ceiling, even though there was nothing yet for it to spin above. What color are the walls? Rosa asked. Yellow. Marcus wanted gray. I told him our baby wasn't being born into a law office. Yellow is right, Rosa said. She was checking supplies, her hands never idle. What's the baby's name? Elena looked at me. We hadn't told anyone. We'd been guarding it like a secret, as if saying the name aloud before the birth would jinx it. And now the concept of a jinx seemed absurd, given that we were hiding in a dead woman's office, while the species collapsed outside. Lucia, Elena said. If she's a girl, after my grandmother. And if he's a boy? Daniel, I said, after nobody. We just liked the name. Rosa nodded. Both strong names. Good. A contraction came, and Elena bent forward, gripping the edge of the examination table. Rosa moved to her side and placed a hand on her lower back, applying pressure in a circular motion. Elena groaned. It was the first sound of real pain she'd allowed herself, and it filled the small room like weather. Breathe into it, Rosa said. Don't fight the pressure. Let your body open. That's easy for you to say. I've been where you are. Twice. My oldest was born during a wildfire evacuation outside Medford. The air was so thick with smoke, we could barely see each other. He came out screaming louder than the sirens. Where are they now? Elena asked between breaths. Rosa's hands didn't stop moving. but something behind her eyes shifted. A door closing. My sister has them. She's in Boise. I was trying to get to them when the highways closed. She said it without drama, the way you state a fact that has already been wept over so thoroughly that the tears have calcified into something structural. She'd set her children aside inside herself, placed them in a room in her mind, and closed the door so she could function. I recognized the strategy because I was watching my wife do the same thing with her fear. "You'll get to them," Elena said. Rosa said nothing. She adjusted the examination lamp and changed the subject. "Marcus, I need you to go back down and check every room for anything we might have missed. Specifically, I want you looking for oxygen, a portable tank, a concentrator, anything, and suction, a manual suction device like a delete trap or a bulb syringe bigger than this one." I went. The search gave me purpose, and purpose was the only painkiller available. I opened every cabinet, every drawer, every closet. In Espinosa's personal bathroom, I found a bottle of ibuprofen and a heating pad. In the file room, I found a flashlight with fresh batteries and a box of latex-free exam gloves. In the storage closet beneath the stairs, I found, behind a collapsed shelf of paper towel rolls, a small portable oxygen tank with a mask attachment. It was perhaps a third full. I carried it upstairs and set it beside Rosa's instrument tray. "Good," she said. She tested the valve. A whisper of oxygen hissed through the mask. "This is for the baby, if needed. Not for us." By noon, Elena's contractions were 5 minutes apart and lasting longer. She'd moved from walking to kneeling, her arms draped over a stack of pillows Rosa had placed on the examination table. The sounds she made had changed, deeper, more guttural, involuntary. Rosa checked her cervix again. 7 centimeters. You're in active labor. This is where it gets intense. This wasn't intense. This was the introduction. Rosa pulled on fresh gloves. The next part is the conversation. Outside, the gray daylight had brightened to something almost white. I could hear nothing from the street. The silence should have been comforting. It wasn't. In a living city, silence means peace. In a dead one, it means the predators are still. Transition is the word for the phase of labor between 7 and 10 centimeters, and I learned later that it's considered the most difficult part. For the person in labor, it's described as overwhelming. The contractions come fast and hard, with almost no rest between them, and the body enters a state that resembles drowning on dry land. For the person watching, it's something else entirely. It's the experience of witnessing someone you love endure something you cannot share, cannot ease, and cannot stop. Elena was on her hands and knees on a nest of blankets Rosa had arranged on the floor. She'd abandoned language. The sounds she made were pre-verbal, drawn from a register I'd never heard a human voice access. Low, sustained moans that vibrated in my chest, punctuated by sharp gasps that sounded like the air being punched from her lungs. Her eyes were closed. She was somewhere else, somewhere internal, navigating a corridor of sensation that I could stand beside but never enter. "Is this normal?" I asked Rosa, for what must have been the 10th time. "This is exactly what it should look like." Rosa was kneeling beside Elena, one hand monitoring the baby's heart rate through a stethoscope she'd found in the second examination room, the other resting on Elena's hip. Her body is doing extraordinary work. It knows what to do. She's in agony. She's in labor. Those aren't the same thing. I wanted to argue, but I didn't have the language for it. Agony implied something wrong. Labor implied something right that simply happened to be devastating. Rosa moved through the room with the physicality of someone who'd done this in tents, in cars, in conditions that made this medical pavilion look like the Mayo Clinic. Her calm wasn't performed. It was structural, load-bearing, and both of us were leaning on it. "Marcus." Elena's voice, raw and ragged. "I need you." I was beside her in a second. She grabbed my forearm with both hands and squeezed with a strength that surprised me, her fingernails pressing crescents into my skin. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something beyond pain. A kind of furious focus, as if she were having an argument with her own body and winning through sheer stubbornness. "I'm scared," she said. It was the first time she'd said it since this started. Not since the outbreak. Not since labor. The first time in our entire relationship that she'd stated raw, unqualified fear without immediately qualifying it or building a plan around it. "I know," I said. "Not of the pain. I can handle the pain." A contraction hit, and she crushed my arm and breathed through it, her jaw locked, her body trembling. When it passed, she finished her sentence as if no interruption had occurred. "I'm scared the world she's born into won't have room for her." She. Elena had said she. We didn't know. We'd chosen not to find out. But in that moment, Elena knew, or decided, or both. And from that sentence forward, our child was a daughter. "There's room," I said. And I meant it, even though the evidence against me filled every street in every city for 1,000 miles in every direction. "We'll make room." Rosa checked the stethoscope again. "Baby's heart rate is strong, 140, perfect range." She looked at me over Elena's back. "Get the warm water. Soak 2 of those towels. I want compresses ready." I moved to the sink. The water pressure from the faucet was almost gone now. A thin stream that took a full minute to saturate a towel. I wrung them out and brought them back. Rosa placed one across Elena's lower back and the other across the back of her neck. Elena shuddered. "That's good," she whispered. "That's really good." From downstairs, a sound. Glass breaking. Not shattering. A single, clean pop, like a bottle dropped on tile. Then silence. Rosa and I locked eyes. "Go," she said, quietly. I picked up the hammer from where I'd left it by the door and moved down the hallway toward the stairs. Every step was deliberate. The staircase creaked on the 4th step from the bottom. I'd noticed it earlier and now skipped it. At the base of the stairs, I paused and listened. The sound had come from the front of the building. I moved through the corridor toward the waiting room and stopped at the threshold. One of the sidelight windows beside the front door had a hole in it, small, fist size, with cracks radiating outward. On the floor beneath it lay a chunk of concrete, thrown or dropped from outside. Through the hole, I could hear the street, and on the street, I could hear breathing. I pressed myself against the wall beside the broken sidelight and tilted my head just enough to see through the hole. The angle was narrow, but it was enough. There were 2 of them on the front steps, close enough that I could hear the wet mechanics of their respiration, a sound like someone breathing through a mouthful of fabric. One was a woman in a jogging outfit, her left arm hanging at an angle that suggested the shoulder had been dislocated and never reset. The other was a teenager in a high school football jersey, number 12, his face slack and his eyes moving in a pattern that wasn't quite random. Scanning, registering, dismissing. They weren't trying to get in. The concrete through the window seemed incidental, the result of a hand grasping and releasing rather than throwing. They stood on the steps the way pedestrians might stand at a crosswalk, waiting for a signal that would never change. I did not breathe. I did not move. Upstairs, muffled by 2 floors and a closed door, Elena moaned through another contraction. And I watched the teenager's head rotate toward the sound. a fractional movement, mechanical and precise. The woman beside him turned the same direction, a half-second later, as if the signal needed to pass between them before both could respond. They listened. I could see it, the quality of their attention. It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't recognition. It was something more primitive and more terrifying. A nervous system stripped to its receptive minimum, a body that had become an antenna. Elena's voice faded. The two figures on the steps returned to their neutral posture. The teenager's scanning resumed. The woman shifted her weight from one foot to the other. I backed away from the window, 1 inch at a time, until I reached the corridor. Then I moved to the supply room, where Rosa had been hiding when we arrived. The walkie-talkie was still on the shelf where she'd left it. I picked it up and turned the volume knob. Static. I cycled through channels. On channel 7, a voice crackled through. Male, middle-aged, speaking in clipped sentences. East side is gone. Burnside bridge down. Morrison still standing, but blocked at both approaches. Anyone hearing this on the west side, the guard pulled out of Pioneer Square at 0600. There is no organized response west of the river. Repeat, no organized. The transmission cut to static. I waited. It returned. A different voice this time, younger, frightened. If anyone has medical, we've got wounded at the convention center. 6 adults, 3 children. We need antibiotics. We need sutures. We need... A burst of noise. Screaming. The channel went dead. I turned the walkie-talkie off and set it down. I stood in the supply room and let the information settle over me like ash. No organized response. No rescue coming. No cavalry. Just us. In this converted Victorian house, with its sage green paint and its sterile cord clamps, waiting for a baby to arrive in a world that had forgotten how to welcome anything. When I returned upstairs, Rosa read my face immediately. How many? 2, on the front steps. They heard her. Rosa processed this without visible reaction. Are the doors secure? Locked, deadbolted. But the side light has a hole now. If more come, if they push, then we deal with it then. Right now your wife is in transition, and your daughter is coming. And that is the only emergency in this room. She turned back to Elena. Elena, I need to check you again. Elena was sitting upright now, leaning back against the wall, her legs extended in front of her. Her face was flushed and damp. She looked at me when I came in, and I made a decision in that moment that I would carry for the rest of my life. I did not tell her about the 2 figures on the steps. I did not tell her about the walkie-talkie. I did not tell her that the world outside had moved from crisis to aftermath while she was building a new life inside this room. Everything's fine downstairs, I said. Elena held my gaze for 2 seconds longer than normal. She knew I was lying. She chose to let me. 9 centimeters, Rosa announced after the check. Almost there. Elena, when you feel the urge to push, do not push. Tell me. Your body will want to bear down. Resist it until I say. How do I resist something involuntary? The same way you resist screaming at someone who deserves it. You acknowledge the impulse and redirect the energy. Blow through it. Short breaths, like you're blowing out candles. How many candles? All of them. Elena closed her eyes. Another contraction built, and I watched her face transform. The muscles tightening in sequence, forehead to jaw, the tendons in her neck standing out like cables. She blew. Short, sharp exhalations. Birthday candles. All of them, on a cake in a kitchen that no longer existed, in a life that had ended 3 days ago, and was somehow still producing new chapters. The urge to push arrived at 2:47 in the afternoon. I know because I'd been tracking contractions on my watch. The last vestige of my belief that documentation could impose order on chaos. Elena made a sound that was unlike anything before. Guttural, surprised, involuntary. A sound that came from the very bottom of her body. "I need to push," she said. Rosa snapped her gloves on. "Let me check." Her hands worked quickly. She looked up at Elena with an expression that was, for the first time, something close to joy. "Full. You're complete. On the next contraction, you push." The room contracted. Everything I'd been and done and feared compressed into this single space, this single moment. Elena was on her back now, propped at an angle with pillows behind her shoulders and neck. Rosa was positioned between her legs, gloved hands ready, the instrument tray within arm's reach. I was at Elena's left side, and she had a grip on my hand that I would feel in my bones for weeks. The contraction came. Elena bore down. The sound she made filled the room, the building, the world. It was not a scream. It was something older. A sound that predated language and would outlast it. The sound of a body performing the most violent act of creation possible. "Good," Rosa said. "Again. Harder." Elena pushed again. And again. Between contractions, she collapsed back against the pillows, gasping, her face colorless, her hair soaked with sweat. I wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. She didn't look at me. On. Somewhere deep inside the work. And the woman I knew, her humor, her sharpness, her impatience, had been replaced by something elemental and ferocious. 4 contractions, 5, 6, each one lasting longer, demanding more. Rosa's face remained calm, her lips counting silently. "Is something wrong?" I asked. Heart rate dipped a little on that last one. 110. I want it back up. She adjusted Elena's position, tilting her to the left side. "Elena, on the next one, I need you to push like you're pushing a car uphill. Everything you've got." "I don't have anything left." "You do. I promise you do." The next contraction rolled through, and Elena pushed with a cry that cracked at its peak, her body curling forward, every muscle engaged, every fiber of her being directed downward with a force that seemed impossible for a human frame to generate. Rosa leaned in. "I can see her." "Elena, I can see the head. She has hair." Elena sobbed. A single, sharp sob that broke something open in the room. In me, in the careful architecture of composure we'd all built to survive the day. She pushed again. "The head is crowning. Marcus, look." I didn't want to look. I wasn't ready. But Rosa's voice carried the authority of someone who understood that this moment would define the rest of my life, and she was right. I looked. What I saw was not what I expected. The clinical descriptions, the diagrams, the half-watched YouTube video, none of it prepared me for the reality, which was savage and sacred in equal measure. My daughter's head, dark-haired and slick, emerging from my wife's body with agonizing slowness, as if the world itself were reluctant to let her in. "One more push, Elena. One more, and she's here." Elena reached down and took my hand again. She looked at me, and in that look was every conversation we'd ever had, every argument, every quiet morning, every plan we'd made for this child's future, compressed into a single second of eye contact. She pushed, and into Rosa's waiting hands, at 3:22 in the afternoon, on day 3 of the end of the world, came our daughter. She was purple and streaked and silent. The silence lasted 3 seconds. It was the longest silence of my life. Rosa cleared the mouth with the bulb syringe, tilted the tiny body downward, and rubbed the back with firm, circular strokes. 1 second, 2, 3. Lucia screamed. They call it the golden hour. The first 60 minutes after birth, when the infant is placed on the mother's chest and the two bodies, newly separated, negotiate the terms of their new arrangement. Skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. In a hospital, this hour is protected, monitored, documented, respected. In a converted Victorian house in a dead city, with 2 infected standing on the front steps and no rescue coming, it was something else. It was an act of defiance so profound that I still don't have language for it. Rosa placed Lucia on Elena's chest. The baby was small, maybe 6 pounds, with dark hair plastered to a skull that seemed impossibly fragile. Her skin was transitioning from purple to pink in patches, like a landscape responding to dawn. Her fists were clenched. Her mouth was open. Her eyes, when they cracked open for a fraction of a second, were the unfocused dark blue of every newborn, seeing nothing and everything simultaneously. Elena was crying. Not the kind of crying that comes from sadness or pain, but the kind that has no category, the kind that lives in a part of the human experience that language has never mapped. She held Lucia against her skin and bent her head down until her lips touched the baby's forehead. And she stayed there, breathing in the scent of her daughter. And for a moment, I ceased to exist. I was irrelevant. The world was irrelevant. The connection between those two bodies was the only circuit that mattered, and everything else was static. Rosa clamped the cord and handed me scissors. "Cut between the clamps," she said. My hands were shaking. The cord was tougher than I expected, rubbery and resistant, and I had to squeeze the scissors twice to get through it. When it separated, I felt something shift in my own chest, a recalibration, as if my body recognized that a new person had entered my gravitational field and was adjusting its orbit accordingly. "Placenta should follow in a few minutes," Rosa said. She was already working, checking Elena for tearing, applying pressure, her hands moving with the matter-of-fact tenderness of someone who understood that the aftermath of birth is as critical as the event itself. "Elena, I need you to tell me if you feel dizzy or if the bleeding seems heavy. Don't be brave about it." "I'm holding my daughter," Elena said. "I've never been less brave in my life." I didn't understand what she meant until later. Bravery is a performance of strength. What Elena was doing was the opposite. A complete surrender to vulnerability. The acknowledgement that this 6-pound creature on her chest now owned every fear, every hope, every waking thought she would ever have. That's not bravery. That's something with no armor at all. Lucia found the breast within 20 minutes. Rosa guided her, adjusting the latch with practiced fingers. And when the baby began to nurse, the sound she made, a tiny, rhythmic swallowing, barely audible, was the most significant sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of the future insisting on itself. I sat on the floor beside the examination table, my back against the wall, and I let myself feel everything I'd been blocking since 4:17 that morning. The fear, the inadequacy, the crushing weight of knowing that I was now responsible for a person who could not survive a single day without me, in a world that had stopped supporting survival. It hit me in waves, each one larger than the last, and I sat there and let them come, because there was nowhere to go and nothing to do but endure them. Rosa sat down across from me. She'd cleaned up, disposed of the medical waste, washed her hands again. She looked tired in a way that went past physical. The fatigue of someone who'd been operating on competence alone and who could now, for the first time in hours, afford a fraction of rest. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet. The next 24 hours are critical. Infection risk, bleeding, temperature regulation for the baby. We need to stay here at least through tonight. And after tonight? Rosa looked at the window, where the blinds still hung closed. After tonight is after tonight. From outside, distantly, a sound. Glass shattering, multiple windows, a cascading chain of destruction moving east along the street like dominoes falling. Then voices, human voices, screaming. Then the screaming stopped. Elena didn't look up from Lucia. The baby nursed on, oblivious, drawing sustenance from a body that had walked through a dead city, climbed stairs through contractions, and delivered new life on an examination table in an abandoned clinic. The golden hour continued, indifferent to the collapsing world outside, a biological clock that ran on its own time in its own country with its own laws. Night came fast. By 6 o'clock, the examination room was dark enough that Rosa turned on the battery lamp, angling it toward the corner so its light wouldn't escape through the blinds. Lucia slept on Elena's chest, wrapped in a towel, her breathing almost inaudible. Just the faintest whistle through nostrils the size of pencil erasers. Elena slept too, or something close to it, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had been outrunning all day. I covered them both with a clean sheet and stood watch. Rosa and I worked in whispers. She showed me how to check the baby's temperature by touch, the back of my finger against the sole of her foot. Warm was good, cool was not. She taught me the warning signs for newborn distress: grunting respiration, blue lips, chest wall retraction, refusal to nurse. She delivered each piece of information with the same clinical efficiency, and I wrote it all down on the back of a patient intake form with a pen from Espinosa's desk, because my memory had been demolished by the day, and I didn't trust it to hold anything more. "You should eat," Rosa said. She was right. I hadn't eaten since the previous night. I opened the peanut butter and ate 3 spoonfuls standing at the counter, washing it down with water that tasted like plastic from the bottle. I offered the jar to Rosa. She took 1 spoonful and screwed the cap back on. "Save it. She'll need the calories for nursing." "What about you?" I had a granola bar in my pocket when the clinic fell. That was yesterday. She said it without self-pity. "I'll be fine." "Rosa?" I said, "I'll be fine." I let it go. There are moments when insisting on someone's welfare crosses a line into taking away their agency. And Rosa had survived the last 3 days on agency alone. I wouldn't strip that from her. At 8 o'clock, I checked the front of the building again. The 2 infected had moved. I could see them down the block, standing near the entrance to a bar, their postures identical. Heads tilted, arms at their sides, that terrible patient waiting. But the steps were clear, and no new figures had appeared. The hole in the sidelight let in cold air that smelled of smoke and something chemical, acrid and industrial. Something large was burning somewhere in the city. I returned upstairs and found Rosa sitting in the hallway outside the examination room, her back against the wall, the walkie-talkie in her lap. She was listening. The volume was turned so low, I had to kneel beside her to hear it. A woman's voice, calm and measured, was repeating a message on a loop. "Tualatin Community Center is operational. South entrance, water and medical available. Armed perimeter." Repeating. "Tualatin Community Center, south entrance, operational." Tualatin, 20 miles south of Portland. An eternity, given current conditions, but operational. The word carried a weight that nothing else could. It meant someone, somewhere, had organized, had built something, had decided that the answer to collapse was construction rather than retreat. "How long has that been playing?" I asked. "Started an hour ago. Repeats every 4 minutes." 20 miles. I know. With a newborn. I know, Marcus. We sat in the hallway, our backs against the wall, separated by 18 inches and the vast distance between our respective fears. Rosa's children were in Boise, 350 miles east across mountains and desert and whatever the highways had become. My child was 12 feet away, asleep on her mother's chest, less than 6 hours old. "Come with us," I said. Rosa didn't answer immediately. She turned the walkie-talkie over in her hands, a small gesture of deliberation that I would come to recognize as her way of processing options before committing to one. Tualatin is south, Boise is east. They're not the same direction. I know, but you can't get to Boise alone. The listing said, hurry in. I got from government infrastructure. Sold as is. That's 14 blocks. No interior inspection 300 miles prior to closing. She turned off the walkie-talkie. $712,000 for a concrete hole in the ground for the morning. On 14 acres of scrub the examination room in central Pennsylvania. A small sound. Lucia, I bought it with money I did not have. The mewing using cry a trust of a newborn fund. I was not supposed discovered to discomfort turned 18 and is registering her complaint, which was 11 months away. I heard Elena, my mother's attorney, had set the fund with a single loophole, and the crying stopped. Real estate acquisition by the for educational or residential purpose. The tiniest human in the building, discretion, issuing demands. The trustee was my aunt. Rosa tilted her head back, stopped returning calls in March, and closed her eyes. I forged her signature on a Tuesday, she said. Settlement was the following Friday. My name. For what? For all of it. I slept for 90 minutes and woke to a sound I couldn't identify. A rhythmic tapping, irregular but persistent, coming from below. I was on the floor of the hallway, a rolled towel under my head. And for 3 disoriented seconds, I couldn't remember where I was or why my hand hurt. Then returned at once. The labor, the birth, the city, the world. The tapping was coming from the ground floor. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. It wasn't the random collision of an infected body against a surface. It had intention. It had rhythm. I grabbed the hammer and the flashlight and went downstairs. The sound was coming from the patio door, the one we'd entered through, the one I'd deadbolted. I approached from the side, keeping out of the line of sight, and listened. Tap, tap. Then a voice, barely louder than breath. "Please, I know someone's in there." I saw the light. A human voice, uninfected, desperate. I moved to the door and angled the flashlight beam through the glass. On the patio stood a man, mid-50s, heavy-set, wearing a paramedic's uniform. His name badge was still clipped to his chest, Gary Okafor, EMT-P, Multnomah County. His face was streaked with dried blood that wasn't his. The pattern was wrong, spatter rather than flow. He held his hands up against the glass, palms out. The universal gesture of surrender. I opened the deadbolt. Gary came in like a man stepping out of a river, trembling, gasping, his legs barely holding him. He sat on the floor of the hallway and put his head between his knees and breathed. I locked the door behind him and stood there, hammer in hand, waiting. "Thank you," he said. "I've been moving for 6 hours. Everything's gone. The firehouses, the precinct on 20th, the shelter at Chapman Elementary, all gone. Are you hurt?" "No, the blood is from..." He stopped. Whatever sentence was coming, he chose not to finish it. I heard a baby. My daughter, born today. Gary looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted, but something in them sharpened. "Born today? Here?" "Upstairs. My wife and a nurse midwife." "A midwife." He almost smiled. "That's the best news I've heard since Monday." He reached for his belt and unclipped a pouch I hadn't noticed. I grabbed what I could from the ambulance before it got overrun. "It's not much." He opened the pouch on the floor between us. 2 IV bags of saline, a packet of oral rehydration salts, a bottle of amoxicillin, a roll of sterile bandage, and 4 chemical heat packs. The sight of those supplies hit me with unexpected force, not because of their material value, which was significant, but because of what they represented. Someone else had been thinking about survival in medical terms. Someone else had prioritized healing over hoarding. And that someone was now sitting on our floor, offering what he'd carried. "These heat packs," I said, picking one up. "For the baby?" "Crack and shake. They'll stay warm for 8 hours. Tuck them around her if the temperature drops." I brought Gary upstairs. Rosa met us in the hallway, scalpel in hand, and assessed him in 3 seconds flat. The EMT uniform helped. The supplies helped more. "Amoxicillin," she said, turning the bottle in her hand. "If there's any postpartum infection, this gives us a fighting chance." Gary stood in the doorway of the examination room and looked at Elena and Lucia. The mother sleeping, the baby curled on her chest like a comma. He didn't speak. He put one hand over his mouth and his shoulders hitched once, and then he straightened up and breathed in and became a professional again. "What do you need from me?" he asked Rosa. "Rest first. Then I need someone to watch the ground floor so Marcus can sleep. Can you do that? I've been an EMT for 22 years. I once stayed awake for 41 hours during the ice storm of 2017. He paused. "I can watch a door?" Rosa nodded. She looked at me, then at Gary, then through the doorway at Elena and the baby. 4 strangers and a newborn, thrown together by catastrophe, held together by necessity. It wasn't a community. It wasn't a family. It was something without a name. Something that existed only because the old categories had burned away and left behind a space where new ones could form. Dawn arrived as a thin line of amber below the clouds. And with it came the decision I'd been postponing since the walkie-talkie first crackled to life. Tualatin, 20 miles south. Water, medical, an armed perimeter, and the word that mattered most, operational. Against that, a newborn less than 18 hours old, a postpartum mother, a city of infected between us and the southern suburbs, and a route that would take us across open ground for miles. Rosa laid it out with her customary absence of comfort. Elena can walk, but slowly. The baby needs to stay warm and nurse every 2 hours. We have no vehicle and no way to get one, without attracting every infected in a 3-block radius. On foot, at Elena's pace, Tualatin is 8 to 10 hours. In daylight? Gary asked. Starting at dawn, through the residential neighborhoods, avoid arterials. The density of infected on the main roads is orders of magnitude higher than the side streets. They cluster around noise and infrastructure. You've been watching them, I said. I've been surviving them. That requires watching. Rosa spread a hand-drawn map on the examination table. She'd sketched it from memory during the night. The streets of southwest Portland rendered in ballpoint pen with annotations. X marks for known infected clusters. Circles for potential shelter points. A dotted line tracing a route through Hillsdale and down through the neighborhoods west of IC5. Gary studied the map with the eye of someone who'd spent decades navigating this city in emergencies. Barber Boulevard is going to be bad. It's a funnel point. Everything moving south gets compressed through there. That's why we go over the hill instead, through the neighborhoods above Barber. More climbing, but less exposure. Elena appeared in the doorway. She was standing under her own power, one hand on the frame, wearing the same Trailblazers shirt. Lucia held against her shoulder in a sling that Rosa had fashioned from a bedsheet. She looked like she'd been disassembled, and put back together by someone working from memory rather than instructions. But she was vertical. She was present. She was listening. I heard all of that, she said, and I can make it. Elena, don't manage me, Marcus. I just pushed a human being out of my body in an abandoned clinic during the apocalypse. I can walk 20 miles. She shifted Lucia's weight. But I need to eat first, and so does she, which means I need to eat a lot. I gave her the remaining peanut butter, the last 2 cans of black beans, and all the water we had left. She ate standing up, mechanically, fueling rather than tasting. And when she finished, she looked at Rosa. What's the worst-case scenario? Rosa didn't flinch. Hemorrhage, infection. The baby gets hypothermic. We get surrounded with nowhere to go. And the best case? We walk 20 miles without incident and arrive at a functioning shelter with medical staff. The truth is somewhere in the middle. The truth is always somewhere in the middle. That's what makes it survivable. We left at 6:15. Gary went first, carrying the oxygen tank and the medical supplies in a duffel bag he'd found in Espinosa's office closet. Rosa walked beside Elena, one hand always near her elbow, ready to catch or support. I walked behind, hammer in hand, backpack on my shoulders, watching the rear with the focused paranoia of someone who had something behind him more valuable than anything ahead. The morning was cold and still. Mist hung in the trees that lined the residential streets, turning the houses into suggestions of houses, their outlines soft and uncertain. A dog barked somewhere to the east, 3 sharp reports that sounded like questions. No human voices, no sirens, no engines. Just our footsteps on the wet sidewalk and the faint, almost subliminal sound of Lucia breathing against Elena's chest. We passed through blocks of homes that looked untouched. Curtains drawn, cars in driveways, jack-o'-lantern remnants on a porch from a holiday that had occurred in another geological era. And then we'd pass a house with its front door open and a dark stain on the welcome mat. And the silence of the neighborhood would reveal itself as the silence of a held breath. Not peace, but suspension. 3 blocks from the clinic, we saw our first infected of the day. An elderly man in a bathrobe, standing in his front yard beside a bird bath, his hands submerged in the stagnant water up to the wrists. He wasn't drinking, he wasn't washing. He was just standing there, his fingers moving slowly beneath the surface, stirring whatever had accumulated in the bowl. He didn't look up as we passed. We gave him 30 feet of clearance and kept moving. Elena didn't look at him either. She looked down at Lucia, and she walked. We made it 4 miles before the first real trouble. The route Rosa had drawn took us through the Hillsdale neighborhood, a quiet residential area that climbed into the West Hills above the city. The streets were narrow and tree-lined, and for stretches of several blocks we could almost believe the world was normal, that we were simply a group of people taking an early morning walk with a newborn. Then we crested a hill and saw what was waiting at the bottom. A school, Raleigh Hills Elementary, its parking lot converted into what had clearly been an emergency staging area. Tents, folding tables, a Red Cross banner hanging from the gymnasium entrance. All of it abandoned. The tents were collapsed or overturned. Supplies were scattered across the asphalt. Canned food, blankets, first aid kits torn open and picked through. And among the wreckage, moving with that terrible patient lurch, were infected, 15, maybe 20, drifting through the parking lot like shoppers in a store that had closed, browsing wreckage that held no interest but unable to leave the space that had drawn them. Rosa held up a hand. We stopped. She studied the scene for 30 seconds, then pointed left, toward a residential street that curved around the school at a distance of about 200 yards. We moved. Halfway around, Elena stopped. She leaned against a fence post and closed her eyes. The color had drained from her face, and when I touched her arm, her skin was cold. "I need a minute," she said. "Take it. I'm bleeding more than I should be." Rosa was beside her instantly. She checked the pad she'd given Elena that morning, and her expression tightened by a fraction that only I caught. "It's within range, but on the high side. We need to keep moving. Standing still makes it worse." She activated one of Gary's chemical heat packs and tucked it inside the sheet sling beside Lucia. "Baby's warm. You're upright. That's what matters right now." Elena straightened up. She took 3 breaths. She began walking again. Gary fell in beside me. He'd been quiet for most of the walk, conserving energy and keeping his attention on our surroundings with the professional vigilance of someone trained to assess threats in real time. "She's tough," he said quietly. "She's terrified. Those aren't mutually exclusive. In my experience, the toughest people are always the most terrified. They just don't let it drive." He paused. "The bleeding concerns me." Rosa said it's within range. Rosa said it's on the high side of within range. Those are different statements. He adjusted the duffel on his shoulder. "If it escalates, we need to stop. Doesn't matter where we are. We stop and we treat." By noon, we'd covered 12 miles. Elena had stopped 4 more times. Lucia had nursed twice, both times while Elena sat on a stranger's porch step, her back against a railing, Gary standing watch at the sidewalk, and Rosa monitoring the feeding with the same intensity she'd brought to the delivery. The baby latched and swallowed and released and slept, her body cycling through its needs with the pure efficiency of something that had not yet learned to complicate survival with fear. The neighborhoods thinned as we moved south. The houses grew farther apart, the lots larger, the trees denser. We crossed a creek on a wooden footbridge and entered a stretch of road bordered by blackberry bramble, so thick it formed a wall on both sides. The thorns were a perimeter. Nothing could come at us from the flanks. For 20 minutes, we walked in a corridor of vegetation that felt, absurdly, like safety. It was on this road that Elena said the thing I carry with me still. "She doesn't know," Elena said. She was looking down at Lucia's face, visible in the gap of the sling. "She has no idea what happened. She has no idea what the world was before. This is her normal. This..." She gestured around us, at the bramble, the abandoned road, the smoke on the horizon, the 4 strangers walking south with everything they owned. "This is just Tuesday to her." I didn't respond because she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to herself, processing a realization that would reshape every decision she made from that point forward. Our daughter would not mourn the old world because she would never know it. She would build her understanding of reality from whatever we showed her, whatever we built, whatever we chose to be in her presence. The weight of that was not grief. It was authorship. We reached the outskirts of Tualatin at 4:30 in the afternoon. The community center was visible from a quarter-mile away, identifiable by the vehicles parked around its perimeter in a defensive ring and the 2 figures on the roof holding rifles. As we approached, a gate in the vehicle perimeter opened, and a woman in a National Guard uniform stepped out. She looked at our group, a graphic designer with a hammer, a nurse midwife with a scalpel, a paramedic with a duffel, a postpartum mother in a basketball shirt, and a baby who was 16 hours old. "Medical?" the woman asked. "She just gave birth," Rosa said. "Yesterday, on a table in a clinic." The guard member spoke into a radio. 30 seconds later, 2 more people emerged from the community center, one carrying a stretcher, the other carrying a bundle of blankets. They moved toward Elena with purpose and care. And Elena let them take her weight for the first time all day. So many times I could close my eyes to the stretcher and feel the sound that might have been relief, or might have been the last every crack in the asphalt finally letting go. Every patched pothole as they carried her through the gate. In August, Lucia woke up and cried. October, not a wail. Every place where the shoulder crumbles into sawgrass across the parking lot gravel and caused the 2 riflemen on the roof to look down to your bathroom and 3 in the morning. For just a moment, you don't lower their weapons. Your body remembers a baby's cry. 31 years with Miami in this new world of moans and Route 29 for the last 14 of them. It was the most foreign sound. The Everglades Express. Some of the drivers was the sound of something beginning. Although there's nothing express about it. We stayed in Tualatin for 11 days. Chrome Avenue, South Elena Homestead. Then west slow US 41 stopped. Through the sawgrass, a retired obstetrician who'd walked in from Lake Oswego on day 5, and the turnaround at examined them both and said Lucia 3 hours and 40 minutes each way on a good day, strong reflexes on a bad day, a heartbeat that sounded like a thunderstorm, determined gator on the road. Rosa left on the morning of the 7th jackknifed at the Monroe County line that was making for the Cascades. Could add an hour. Didn't matter. She hugged Elena for a long time. I liked the particular quality of silence a bus takes on breathing when the last suburbs fall away, and then she handed the grass opens up and walked out the gate without turning. There's nothing between you and the Gulf. Gary stayed. But 40 miles of water. He became the shelter's primary medic. My name is Edwin Riggio. I last saw him organizing a 59 years old on the morning I'm going to tell you about. Competence he'd carried through 11 months that night from mandatory retirement. I think about that walk constantly. My wife, Carol, 20 miles through the had already started cutting out pictures of Airstream trailers and leaving them on the kitchen table like ransom notes. And I told her, sure, we'd go see the grandkids in Asheville. We'd drive the Blue Ridge. I think about Elena saying, we'd do all of it. This is just Tuesday. I meant it mostly. But some mornings, I'd sit in the depot lot at 5:40 a.m., that single sharp with my thermos, and look at bus and how every armed adult within earshot. My bus still. Not from threat, but from recognition. It was the sound the world makes when it refuses to stop.